Great. Thank you. I'm very excited to be speaking to the Electoral Area Services Committee today about the progress that we've made on a project to consolidate the 9 electoral area zoning bylaws. Hasib's my co-presenter, and he may also jump in as we go through this presentation and discussion. Today, we're going to talk about the principles that guided the project, the work and the process to consolidate the 9 existing zoning bylaws into one zoning bylaw, the results and the next steps, and we'll conclude with any questions you might have and a discussion. So first off, what is a zoning bylaw? The province of BC gives local governments like the FBRD the power to adopt zoning bylaws. Zoning bylaws regulate the use of land and how you build buildings on the land. The FBRD zoning bylaws list all of the uses that you're allowed to do in a certain zone. If a use that you want to do is on that list of permitted uses, then it's allowed. Conversely, if you want to do something that's not on the list of permitted uses, it's not allowed. Zoning bylaws also regulate the density of uses. For example, number of homes that could be built on one property. And zoning bylaws also regulate the size and shape of buildings. Size and shapes of buildings, they can be regulated by setbacks and height. And zoning bylaws also regulate the size of new lots that are created by subdivision. But the bylaws we have in effect today came to us from three now amalgamated regional districts: Fraser-Sham, Duvernay-Alouette, Central Fraser Valley. The zoning bylaws of these regional districts were drafted in the late 70s through to the early 90s. Current bylaws, you can get sort of a sense of the land issues of the day. For example, seen here, pinball arcades and video arcades are specifically actually excluded in some of the zones we have. And these bylaws were also drafted around the time that Canada moved from the imperial system to the metric system. And they all had a different take on how to round numbers. So for example, 25 feet was a very common setback to a lot line. And some bylaws rounded this to 2 decimal places, like 7.62 meters. Others went to 7.6 and some rounded to 7.5. And this is going to come up later in my discussion here. So the FBRD board directed staff to undertake this project. The board's direction was to provide consistency, clarity, and ease of use by the general public, and to support the EASC objective of providing excellent customer service and reduced red tape. The board direction was to achieve a consolidated and user-friendly zoning bylaw for all of the electoral areas. Now, you might notice that there are 9 bylaws in effect, but there are only 8 electoral areas. So I got a trivia question for you. Which EA has the most zoning bylaws? How many does it have? Anybody?
No idea.
The answer is electoral area B, and there are 3.
Any history on why that happened?
Oh, at the top of my head, we've got bylaws in the official community plan areas in Laidlaw, and then in the Canyon, and then a separate zoning bylaw for the areas that are outside of OCP areas.
Wow.
That's probably why. So the question is, well, why undertake this task in the first place? So the primary focus, like I said, is to achieve a consolidated and user-friendly zoning bylaw for all the EAs. Now, from a builder or a designer's perspective, current FBRD bylaws create challenges when working in one bylaw and then switching to another. For example, setbacks in most FBRD bylaws, they allow for overhangs to encroach into setbacks, but that's not the case in all the bylaws. In some bylaws, setbacks are measured clear to sky, and so there's no allowances for eaves. And this is a major issue for designers because they're used to regulations that allow for overhangs. It's an industry expectation, and it's quite common elsewhere. So from time to time, development variance permits are considered when the siting of eaves becomes an issue. And having one common set of basic regulations will assist homeowners and builders and FBRD staff. For staff, we have to know these bylaw nuances inside and out, and we must ensure that we apply the correct regulations. So if we get asked, what are the setbacks in the rural zone? Well, we have to first determine which of the 12 rural zones applies. So how is this consolidated work guided? When an opportunity to create 2 or more zones was identified, the resulting consolidated zone had to maintain all of the existing permitted uses. So in other words, the consolidation process could not take away any use that is currently permitted. No increase in regulations. So I mentioned that metric imperial conversion issue. When an opportunity to consolidate 2 or more zones was identified, the resulting consolidated zone went with the most permissive setback or height. And in most cases, we're talking about a few centimeters. And another reason that we went with the most permissive setback was to avoid non-conforming siting issues. And I'll note that the Local Government Act already has a section in the legislation that deals with non-conforming uses and siting. So when these situations do arise, the legislation will guide us. On small lot zones, there weren't as many opportunities to consolidate those zones, so the setbacks and height limits didn't change, for example, in Popcom and Lindell Beach. We also had 2 legal reviews of the consolidation work, and these legal reviews identified opportunities to implement today's best bylaw drafting practices. This meant taking current regulations that were often expressed in very lengthy paragraphs and converting them to lists, bullets, and diagrams. And these practices will help reduce confusion and misinterpretation. The 9 zoning bylaws contain about 120 zones, and we found opportunities to consolidate some zones with others and reduce the number of zones by about half to where we have about 60 zones. But some zones were so unique that they were not consolidated with others. Small lot zones, for example, in Lindell Beach and Popcom, but a lot of the Dewdney Alouette zones in electoral area F and G were not consolidated. So as part of the public engagement process going forward, we'll have a table of concordance be made available to show which zones we were able to consolidate and those that were not. And you might ask, well, what about second dwellings or cannabis regulations or other EA issues of the day? This project did not address these issues. The focus for this project was on a technical analysis of the existing regulatory framework. These other issues will require robust engagement and discussion with area residents. And adding these issues onto this project would distract from the technical exercise of consolidation. Once this consolidation work is completed, however, one bylaw will make future EA-wide initiatives much easier to draft and implement. So how did we do this? Spreadsheets, so many spreadsheets. And a lot of the heavy lifting and the technical evaluations was actually done by our consultant. Their work focused on identifying opportunities for consolidation, looking at common language to use, and common regulations to go forward. Every definition was reviewed, general regulations, setbacks, height, parking, and zones were compared based on permitted uses and regulations to find commonalities. On this table, I'm showing an example of comparing in the first column to the 17 commercial zones. And this work grouped similar zones and identified opportunities for consolidating zones where the uses matched, the setbacks and the height and the subdivision regulations were also similar. What about the results? So a great deal of effort was put into making sure that we use the same language throughout the bylaw. Because we were starting with a base of 9 bylaws, each with its own drafter, the language used to describe the same things is different. The current bylaws use synonyms to describe the same things. And this project was an exercise in eliminating synonyms. Synonym reduction was a very large task. It was one of my primary tasks in this project. So as I mentioned, the legal reviews reinforce the implementation of today's best practices when it comes to bylaw drafting. We look for opportunities to use as many lists as possible. And many of these long run-on sentences, we were able to break them down into lists. And this style of bylaw formatting is aimed at reducing confusion and misinterpretation because every and every or, and every semicolon actually has meaning. So I'm almost done here, sorry. New layer in the mapping. So the key to any zoning bylaw is the mapping. And it's important to note that the current zone boundaries are not being changed. So if you had an existing split zone property, it will remain split zoned. Lands that have no zoning will continue to have no zoning. And we see that in portions of area A and B. Should the bylaw receive first reading, a new row will be added to the online web map to show the proposed consolidated zone for each property. It'll be highlighted right below the row with the current zoning. So here in this image, a new row would be added below the zoning R to show consolidated zoning and a link to that new zone. Now for the part that I'm excited about. Right now, our bylaws are presented to the public and staff as bookmarked PDFs. It's fine, but it's difficult to navigate a PDF document and flip from one page to the other. So we looked at other municipalities for better ways to display and navigate zoning bylaws. And we actually looked to the city of Calgary and Edmonton and found that they're using an Adobe product called RoboHelp, and they have an interactive land use bylaw for their public to use. And I'll show you how we mock that up with an FVRD zone. So this is the beta test that we created to display portion of the consolidated zoning bylaw in RoboHelp. So in the web map, if you click on a property, you can be taken directly to a zoning bylaw. This is what you would see. So on the left is a mock-up of a rural 1 zone. And you might notice all these blue italicized parts. All those blue words are defined terms or have specific regulations. And all those live elsewhere in the bylaw. So it's either in a definition section or a regulation section. But what RoboHelp does, it allows you to click on these blue words and have the definitions pop up without you having to go look them up or scroll through the document. On the right, it shows what pops up when you click on farm use. I think that RoboHelp will be a great tool to help EA residents navigate their zoning bylaw much more efficiently. And it's going to help staff as well. So I'm getting close to the end here. What's next? So as we work towards bringing the consolidated bylaw forward for consideration for first reading, we're also working on an enhanced digital engagement. So we'll have a new section of the FVRD website dedicated to this project. We're looking to create a simple tool where you can just type in your property address and have your current and proposed bylaws pop up for you. We're also looking to create simplified concordance tables for about a dozen of the current zones. And we found that 12 of the current zoning designations represents about 75% of all of the properties in the FVRD. So these tools, the new web mapping, RoboHelp, concordance tables, these will all be available after first reading. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about this project. And I'm going to leave you with the final slide here. And this is a quote from our consultant. And they said that this project was not an apples to apples comparison. It was more like comparing an orangutan to the theory of relativity.
Wow.
So I'll stop there and we can go into any questions or discussions at this point.